Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cambridge Climate Lecture Series. My name is Marcel, and I'm a member of the organizing committee of the series for this year. So first, let me introduce you to CCLS, Cambridge Climate Lecture Series. We were born with the idea and the objective to open a global conversation around the topic of climate change. We want this conversation to be open. We want this university to open up to the global community and make education and knowledge around climate change available to everyone that knows. We also want to take the conversation the other way back as well and hear from everyone in the world, learn from everyone in the world, and exchange these ideas that is very critical for solving climate change. So the way how we work is that every week, for 4 weeks, we invite different individuals or organizations to come to Cambridge and talk about what they know about climate change. Today we have Climate Tracker with us, and they're going to be talking about engaging youth through journalism and the work that they do worldwide. This year we also have started a new project. Together with Climate Tracker, we have organized an article competition, an article program. We have had more than 80 articles written all over the world and published in national newspapers in almost all the continents in the world. So it's been a highly successful program. And today we're going to hear from one of the participants of this project through a video that he sent to us. Building up on the success of this program, we're today launching our new program, which is the Cambridge Climate Frontlines program. With this program, we want to give voice to those communities most affected by climate change, that they're living in the front line to the fight against climate change. We also want to recognize the dimensions of justice and rights that climate change has embedded in the problem itself. We want to recognize that it's a few minority of the people living in Western communities, that they are responsible for the vast majority of the greenhouse gas emissions. We also want to recognize that it's the Western, the Occidental socioeconomical systems that are behind and are driving climate change and are responsible for that. And with these also, that our value sets, the Western value sets, has failed to raise up to the challenge of climate change. Our values are not giving a response to the climate injustice that we're living nowadays. So with this, we want to turn our sight and we want to listen to those communities that they have the respect for nature in the center of their community, in the center of their culture. We want to hear to those communities and give voice to those communities with a completely different set of values that put nature at the center and at the root. So with this program, we welcome applications by any individual or organization that wants to take part in building up this communication project. So we're welcoming applications and proposals from anyone that wants to access this program. We want to give voice to as many people as possible, and everyone that wants to apply and put forward a proposal, they can access a budget of up to £2,500 to help them out in building up this project and letting us know what are their values and how do they think we can find the solutions. There's a lot that we can learn from these communities, and we should not regard ourselves just as experts. We also are learners, and we have a lot to learn from them. So without further ado, I want to introduce you now to today's speaker, which is Renee Karunungan. She's the outreach manager for Climate Tracker, and she's currently studying at UEA a master's in media and international development. So please welcome Renee.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm happy that you are all here tonight for our lecture on how to engage youth through journalism. So I'll be talking about Climate Tracker, what we do, and how we engage young people to talk about climate change in their countries or even at the international level. So I will begin by telling you some stories. So first, this is my story. I come from the Philippines, which has 26 typhoons on average each year, 5 of which will be destructive. And in 2013, I don't know if you've heard, but one of the strongest typhoons to ever make landfall in recorded history hit a part of our country, and Tacloban was most hit. There were 7,000 people dead at least. That was the official count, but estimate counts up to 10,000 people dead. In 2014, I joined this. It's called the Climate Walk. And we wanted to commemorate all the dead people, the victims of that typhoon. It was a 1,000-kilometer walk that started from Manila to the island of Tacloban. And it was led by our then Climate Change Commissioner, Yeb Sanyo, who you will see in the middle, leading the walk. And my task was actually to gather stories of the communities that we passed by who are affected by climate change. And one of the stories is Ate Vicky. Ate is what we call sister. She's 58 years old, and you will see her piggery. That's her piggery. This was after a typhoon hit her community. It's in Veriato, Samar. It's an island. And when she talked to me and told me that when the typhoon hit, they were living by the river, and the river overflowed. And so after the typhoon, she went out of her house, and her neighbors ran to her and told her, "Your pigs are swimming by the road." And she couldn't believe it. She was like, "My pigs aren't swimming, they're in the piggery." But so she ran to her piggery and saw her pigs were actually swimming, and she had to get them one by one, and save them and save her livelihood. And when I met her, this was about already a year after the typhoon hit, and her piggery was still like this. There was no aid coming to the community, and she was hoping that by documenting her story and that by people reading her story, that finally someone will help their community and rebuild what was lost. So that's Aling Vicky. These are the women of Basay, Samar. These women, they are weavers, so they weave mats, and the mats are made of a grass. It's called tikog. They weave inside the cave every day because it's too hot to weave outside, and the grass will basically break. So these women, when Typhoon Haiyan hit, the field of grass, it basically died. Everything was hit by the typhoon, and they had to rebuild their livelihood. They had to ask aid. I believe Oxfam International helped them rebuild the field that they need, and they were able to. So now they still produce these mats, and they are able to sell them in the capital and internationally. And last one is this Climate Resiliency Field School. It's actually a very small school located in Irosin in Sorsogon. And it's amazing because it was started just by farmers. The farmers have been experiencing less harvest because of too much rain. And they realized that they needed to understand what was happening. They didn't understand climate change. They didn't understand climate science. And so what they did, if you see the charts above, they actually jot down how many rainfall goes to their community each year, the temperature every day, and what kind of crop or what kind of rice, these are rice, different varieties of rice, they plant. So by doing that for about a few years now, they are able to see the trend and what kind of harvest, what kind of rice they would plant to have good harvest. So these are 3 stories that I found while walking 500 kilometers in Climate Walk. And these are stories that are rarely covered by media. You will never hear this in television. You will never read this in newspapers because there's no platform for this. People will not read this. This is not a sellable story. And so that's why I joined Climate Tracker. I learned about Climate Tracker in 2015. It wasn't called Climate Tracker yet. It was called Adopt a Negotiator. And I will tell you our history later. And I thought Climate Tracker was a very, very good platform to publish stories that aren't usually published in mainstream media. Stories of your community, stories of your neighbors who are affected by climate change, which will never be on CNN, which will never be on the BBC, but stories which you can tell. And so in 2015, I joined the Climate Tracker team. I went to the United Nations conference in Bonn and started focusing my work writing about climate change and gender and climate change and human rights, which are two of my interests in the climate change sphere. So here we are. This is in 2015. This is COP21, and this is the team that went to Paris. It was a very international team, so we have people from Bangladesh, Costa Rica, Venezuela, India, Ghana, Trinidad and Tobago, Madagascar, Sudan, Spain, Germany. So almost all countries were represented. And it's very important what we do at the COP, and I'll tell you more about it. So I'll tell you about Climate Tracker's history. It was in 2009, and we were still a very small team. It was actually just a small project under the Global Call for Climate Action. And it was COP15 in Copenhagen, which was a very important meeting. So before Paris, it was in Copenhagen that was supposed to have a binding deal, but that failed. But before that failed, everyone thought, hey, why don't we bring in young people to these negotiations? These negotiations are almost always just attended by old white men. I'm sorry, but that is true. And so we needed more young people to be in these negotiations and to be involved and engaged. And how can we best do that? So the first team, these were the first fellows, literally called Adopt a Negotiator, because they would adopt a negotiator from their country, follow them around, stalk them around the negotiations, and write if they were working or not working. And there are anecdotes that say one of them was French, and she started just writing on her blog. But Le Monde, which is one of the biggest newspapers in France, started picking up what she was writing, and her article started becoming like headlines and in the front page of Le Monde. And so if her negotiator screwed up, they would be there. And suddenly her negotiators would be briefing her every morning, meeting with her, telling her, please, don't do this, don't write this, we will do well in these negotiations. So it was a good way to hold these negotiators accountable. And starting then, we always had these t-shirts. When we walked in the halls of these conferences, we are young people. Some people don't take us seriously. But when we wear these t-shirts, people walk away from us because they know we will write about them if they do something wrong, and they will be in the front page, and we will not be scared about it. And so that is our reputation now. So this was, again, in COP15. This was COP20 in Lima, so again, diverse group of people. This was us in Marrakesh in COP22. And this was just last year in Bonn. So aside from what I've already told you, I want to tell you our impact, not just inside the negotiations, but in our countries, in our communities. So we say that we are the next generation of climate journalists. Currently, we have 7,000 journalists in 150 countries tracking climate change around the world. We publish articles in different languages. So we always say, people always ask us, should I publish in English or can I publish in my local dialect or local language? And we always say, publish in your local language or dialect because that will be more effective in your local community. And that's what you need. And so this is a video, and just to show you what we do at Climate Tracker. So these are our staff. We were working in Bonn at COP23. And so I'll just show you what we do.
Climate Tracker basically is a network of more than 6,000 environmental journalists from over 150 countries. We run publishing competitions. We developed an app for that, where we incentivize young writers all around the world to publish on the most important climate topics. Then we combine it with trainings, either online, in webinars, or also on the ground in workshops we do all around the world. These publishing competitions are incentivized by fellowships or other things, and the best people get then, for example, to COP, where we are right now.
Hi, my name is Arthur from Climate Tracker, and we brought 7 amazing journalists to the UN negotiations. They're from quite unique countries like Togo, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and they're often the only journalists of these countries here. They face many difficulties in reporting about climate change back in their country, so that's why Climate Tracker tries and helps them explain in very easy terms to a wide public what climate change means to their countries.
We are a team of 10 people publishing in 10 different countries in around 7 languages. So there's one very cool thing that we do in the mornings, which is the daily track. The daily track is a summary in a fun, interesting way of what's going on in the negotiations. So we try to break it down for people who have never been here before or who are a bit lost. And we try to give the intel, but also what's happening in news.
I joined Climate Tracker last year in 2016 in Marrakesh, Morocco, because I was one of the COP fellows, and in that COP I managed to write 11 articles in only 2 weeks and publish in the biggest newspapers in my country. So right now I handle the Arab World programs and campaigns in Climate Tracker. We focus on encouraging young activists and writers from all over the Arab region to write about climate change related issues and therefore make their voice heard by the decision makers and affect their community and society.
Through like 2 years, almost 2 years of being with Climate Tracker, I learned how important it is to reach people who don't understand what all this policy or what all these technical scientific terms are about. Back in the Philippines, which is one of the most vulnerable countries, people really don't understand what climate change is, and that remains to be a problem because at the end of the day, these are the people who are fighting in the front lines, and they should be able to understand what they are facing. The importance of Climate Tracker is being able to educate and make people aware of what they can do to help fight climate change. So, in a nutshell, this is what we do. We bring together young people from different parts of the world, and we work together to write about the important issues in our countries. And we are very proud because last year it was the first time that our team had someone from Iraq and Afghanistan. And these are, of course, war-torn countries, and you will rarely hear about climate change in their news. And these are the young people who write about climate change and help make it an important issue in their countries as well. And so in 2015, The Guardian named the best young climate campaigners to watch before the UN Paris Summit, and all except one was actually a Climate Tracker. So the years here are the years when we started joining Climate Tracker. And a lot of these people now, whether or not they're still writing or journalists, they have gone on to other positions. For example, some of them actually became negotiators inside the climate change conferences. Some of them became heads of organizations or have started, for example, grassroots organizing campaigns. So we've all gone through 2 different things, but we've become influencers, if you may, and we've helped shape narratives in our countries, in our regions. So these are some of the articles. So Pari from India, Dizan from Trinidad and Tobago, Thais from Argentina, Anna from Spain. And one of our stars, we call her Domoina. She's actually from Madagascar. And when we brought her, she's not a professional journalist, but she's a very good writer. And no one really talks about climate change in Madagascar. But Domoina started becoming a writer who writes headlines and front cover stories of Matin, which is the newspaper in Madagascar. And it wasn't as if that Domoina was, this professional journalist who had 10 years of experience. But it was because through our writing fellowships, we've helped people become better journalists. And as she says, this is what she says, it's a great opportunity for young people to get their voices taken in account at national, regional, and international levels on what they would like to be done in the world about climate change. The second one, Jed, so he's from the Philippines as well, and he published this in the leading newspaper. And Ali is from Sudan, and he also published in one of the newspapers in Sudan. Charlotte, also same as Domoina, but in her case, she never published an article before she actually joined Climate Tracker. But by 2015, she was able to publish in so many newspapers in Belgium and in the EU. So these are, again, some of the comments from Lucia, who is a journalist from Costa Rica, and Federico, who is the vice president of the Italian Climate Network. So as Federico says, the project or the organization always ensures that we cover topic and we share knowledge on both inside and outside the United Nations conference. So we actually, when we are inside the conference and journalists in our network publish articles, we actually go to the negotiators and hand them what our journalists wrote and published. And many of them would be, this is actually correct, and we would take this into consideration when negotiating today. So we would write about, for example, climate finance or loss and damage, or including human rights inside these negotiations. And it's important because while we are doing this, our journalists also feel that their voices are heard inside the conference. Because when you're inside this conference, people tend to be in a bubble. They say jargon after jargon, and people outside don't actually know what they are talking about. But through building that, bridging that gap between journalists and policymakers, even scientists and the public, then people will understand more what we are actually talking about in these negotiations. So this is a photo of Andreas actually talking to negotiators. This was last year, just in Bonn, and this is Anna. And this was like a last-minute huddle on what was happening. And we were trying to explain to different people what was happening inside the conference. But outside the conference, we've had many impacts as well. For example, Lina from Sudan, who you've seen in our video, she's very young. When she joined us, she was only 18. And there are not many female writers in Sudan. And since she started writing for us, she's now writing for the 3 biggest newspapers. And she's the only journalist focusing on climate change. Ana Carol from Brazil, who is our fellow for COP22 in Marrakesh, she was publishing about subsidies to coal plants. And after her series of articles about it, the president vetoed the law. Of course, it's not only her work that vetoed the law, but because she was in the headlines day after day, that helped put the spotlight on the issue. And Aruna from India, she was a fellow from COP23, so she exposed coal mining and power producing states in India. So this has caused several state pollution control boards to put forward efforts to set up monitors in these states. And these are only 3 of the impacts. There are some other stories. For example, our fellow from Pakistan, because of her constant publishing of articles on climate change, she was asked to be to join testimony in her government to talk about climate change. So these are just some of the stories from our fellows. And of course, we have Risalat, who is in blue. He's from Bangladesh, and he recently joined the World Economic Forum, and he was basically beside all these big people like Al Gore, and I think Salil Mul, who was here last week, was also there, and he represented young people. And just this week, one of our youngest Philippine fellows, Angelica, she won the Best News Story in a Science Journalism Awards for an article that was an output of a climate tracker workshop. So this was her comment to our director. It was her first fellowship ever as a journalist, and she says that Climate Tracker has helped her become into a better communicator. So we connect young journalists, and apart from just publishing stories, we actually hold workshops. So last year we did several workshops in many countries like Philippines, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Peru, etc. This was a photo from our workshop in Indonesia. This was our workshop in Peru. This was in the Philippines. This was in Ethiopia. This was in Bangladesh. And I'm going to show you just one video from our Indonesia workshop.
Hello everybody, my name is Muhammad Marwan.
I'm from Jakarta.
Hi, I'm Dila from Indonesia.
My name is Rajasen Endrali. My name is Agniadi. I'm 25 years old.
I'm 23 years old. I'm from Balikpapan, East Kalimantan.
My name is Desi. I'm 23 and I'm from Indonesia.
Nama saya Sarah Rosmeri Megini. Saya dari Bogor.
It's day 2 of the Climate Tracker Indonesian Climate Journalism Workshop. Last night we went until 9:30 with an amazing group of 23 young people from almost every island region of Indonesia. We did some data visualization just now, and right now they are learning from the person who is the head of peatland recovery across all of Indonesia. So some pretty important lessons being learned right now.
Dan untuk kegiatan Climate Tracker hari ini sangat sungguh memuaskan sekali, dan yang paling saya senangi dari workshop ini adalah saat membuat data jurnalism dari beberapa narasumber yang sudah ada.
From this workshop, I'm hoping to write more about peatland, as I learned from one of the most prominent actors here in Indonesia, from the head of the Peatland Restoration Agency itself.
I would like to thank the Climate Tracker to organize such a great learning experience for Indonesian youth.
It has been a really good experience to meet a lot of journalists from all over Indonesia. The best thing I learned throughout this workshop is that how journalism product can be so diverse. You can make a lot of articles, you can make a lot of video. There are a lot of things that you can do to spread awareness about climate change. So be part of it.
So basically what Climate Tracker does is we kind of fill the gap. We know there is a big gap between the public and the scientists, even the academe and the public, and even policymakers and the public. Basically, those who are in the front lines of climate change, like the people who I met in the climate walk, don't even know what climate change is, don't even know what they are facing. And that's because everyone lives in his or her own bubble. If you're a policymaker, you're just a policymaker. If you're a scientist, you're just a scientist. You're just in the lab. You're just producing 500-word technical scientific papers, which no one ever reads. Right? I mean, that's the truth. Who reads? I don't even read them, right? And that's a big problem. Because if people don't understand what they are facing, how can they solve it? And communities are the best people to solve their problems. I cannot solve what is happening in this island because they are the best ones to know. They live there. They've been living there for maybe thousands of years. Their ancestors have been there for thousands of years. And now they don't know what's happening to them. How can they solve it? So that's what we try to do. We try to make science, we try to make policy more digestible so that people understand it better. And that's the next thing. Even the UN Climate Panel says communicating the science is the next step. So, for example, we have these in our website. We have stories about Nepal's farmers. This is about the people of Cusco, Peru. And this is actually a very nice story. In Peru, their glaciers are melting, which is causing drought, which basically means they can't do any more harvest for agriculture. And their traditions are being lost because young people of this community are going to the cities and finding other jobs and leaving their traditions and cultures behind. And it is only now the adults, the older generation, who are trying to keep these traditions alive. And so you see, climate change, it's not just about natural disasters. It's also about us losing our cultures. And many cultures are being threatened by this. Imagine small island states like the Marshall Islands or like Tuvalu or Fiji. They need to relocate everyone. And where will they go? Who will they be? And you rarely hear about that. We always say rising sea levels. The sea levels will rise how many meters? There will be more drought. How many thousand people will be affected by heat waves? But there is a tendency to reduce people into numbers. And we don't want to reduce people into numbers because each person has a story. Each person has her own experiences about climate change, and that's what we want to tell. Because stories are very impactful. Stories can change your views. We also do, for example, infographics about what's happening inside these international conferences. So I know last week was about loss and damage. So this is an infographic we made about loss and damage. And in the end, I just want to say that climate change is about people. We can talk about the planet every day, but as my friend would say, the planet won't go anywhere. It won't actually die. We will die before the planet dies. So it's all about people, and we need to tell about the stories of the people. What are they experiencing? And there is power in young people telling stories. In communities, you won't always see journalists going to very remote places just to document one story. But we will have young people who are eager to talk about this and write. And that's what the Climate Tracker platform is for. So Eric Liu, I got this from TED Ideas. He says story is the catalytic agent for changing the status quo. So when you want to challenge the powerful, you must change the story. And climate change is about challenging the powerful. Because whether we admit it or not, climate change is about climate justice. There are people who did this, and there are people who are suffering because of the people who did this. And in my perspective, from a developing country who's vulnerable to climate change, we need these people to be responsible. And how can we do that if we don't tell them what we are experiencing at the very grassroots level? We need to change the story of climate change. It's not just about heat waves or droughts. It's not just about typhoons. It's about the people. And my last video would be the winner of our writing competition. So his name is Chagose, and he will talk about how climate change is affecting his country and the solutions that they actually have.
Hello everyone, I am Chiagozelde from Nigeria. I'm 23. I've been working on climate change since I was 17. It gives me immense pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to you today as part of the Cambridge Climate Lecture Series. First, I'm very happy to have emerged as one of the winners of this writing competition. It gives me immense pleasure that my little contribution towards addressing the effects of climate change in the global south, especially in my country, Nigeria, is being recognized. Thank you to everyone that made this possible. In Nigeria, we've been facing the huge effects of climate change in diverse ways. First, it started to be prominent through the Lake Chad Basin troubles. The Lake Chad Basin is a lake in northeastern Nigeria bordering over 5 countries in West and Central Africa, including Chad, Niger, Cameroon, Nigeria, and even more. This lake has shrunk from 45,000 square kilometers to about 3,000 square kilometers in less than 3 decades ago, and the government's response has been lethargic. The shrinkage of this lake has caused over 10.5 million displacement of Nigerians, Nigerians, Cameroonians, Chadians, and even more within this sub-region of Africa. We are counting about 2.3 million people that are under critical malnourishment conditions. Even the UN had failed to meet its required budget to be able to cater for this humanitarian disaster. This all could have been averted by a strong adaptation measure if the government had been proactive in addressing climate change. We also have the current issue that is rampaging the country Nigeria in the form of the Fulani herdsmen crisis. This has caused massive devastation of human lives and properties. This crisis emanates from the Fulani herdsmen who are nomadic and they rear cattle around the country, coming from the north where there is less green vegetation owing to increased desertification and also lack of government response as regards to increased drought and lack of adaptation in terms of climate smart agriculture. This has forced Fulani herdsmen to move down to the southern part of Nigeria where there is still sufficient green vegetation invading the farmlands of some both subsistence and commercial farmers around the southern part of Nigeria. And this has led to violent crises and clashes between the farmers and the herdsmen and has led to the death of at least 2,000 Nigerians in less than 5 years. This has caused massive displacement of people and even IDP camps that are unaccounted for. Nigerians are living as internally displaced persons in their own country. There has been talks about climate refugees. It is a reality in Nigeria and the world needs to know this. There's a disappointment that the government is not addressing the root cause of our troubles. In the last 5 years, the single biggest threat to our national security in Nigeria has come from climate change. Sadly, the government had either failed to understand this or deliberately ignored this. They had always responded by deploying the security agencies, the military, the police, the civil defense, and all whatnot to address security challenges. But the root cause stays there, remains there, and is unattended to. Climate change has aided Boko Haram to recruit people in northeastern part of Nigeria when the Lake Chad dried to the point that people lost livelihood. The lake went several kilometers back, and it was easy for the terrorist group to be able to trespass across the borders. They were able to recruit young people who lost their livelihood and were drenching in a massive poverty. They needed a place out, and Boko Haram offered them the economic means to be able to survive. The country has failed to address that. The country has failed to address immense desertification in northeastern Nigeria, which has allowed this Fulani herdsmen to trespass with their cattle from the north to the southern part of Nigeria unchecked and bearing arms to killing people and destroying crops. The government have failed to recognize this. And even the Nigerian public too have failed to recognize climate change as the most single threat to our national security. We still see it from the ethnic prison because this country has over 250 ethnic groups, and indeed at this point is more divided than I've ever seen it. And so it kind of blinds the eye of people to be able to see things from very rational perspective. It is interesting that in the next 1 year, Nigeria will be going for a national election to elect a new president. Climate change will, for the first time in the history of Nigeria, be a big decider for who becomes the president. The country at this point may not recognize that. The country at this point may not want to admit that. The country at this point may not even understand that, but that is the reality. The Fulani herdsmen and farmers clashes is number one priority on the discussion list in Nigeria today, and this would be a big decider for the 2019 election. The sooner we realize that climate change is actually the main decider for the next election in Nigeria, the better it will be for government policies and for candidates who will be contesting this election to make their priorities right and know what needs to be addressed. Nigeria has suffered so much as a developing country. Nigeria has an immense population of close to 200 people. We must get our policies right in terms of adaptation, in terms of addressing issues of climate change, and being even proactive in this sector. This country has gone beyond giving the Ministry of Environment to political allies as compensation for their immense resourcefulness during campaigns, to bringing in competent people who are versed in policies and global partnerships that will enhance and also enforce global standard practices that will address issues of climate change in Nigeria. I would like to say this, that the media in Nigeria has been immensely supportive of initiatives to bring climate change to the fore. The way my article was received in the country has been immensely energizing. At least 8 national newspapers were able to publish the article I pitched to them, and also give voice to other people addressing the same issue, speaking on how climate change has immensely been the driver behind Nigeria's worst crisis in the last 10 years. It is important that this partnership continues between climate activists and advocates and then the media, and also that we take this from this point to even the policymakers to be able to understand really and articulate great policies as regards climate change in Nigeria. But again, I must say that climate change at this point is underreported. Events and chains of events coming off because of the activities or because of the effects of climate change in Nigeria is still underreported, and more needs to be done in this regard. I want to thank the Cambridge University for this wonderful opportunity for pulling people together across the globe to discuss the single biggest threat to our global existence in this century. We inherited a planet full of life, full of green, full of everything good from our forefathers. We must bequeath a healthy planet to the generation unborn. Just like we said during the last day of the COP22 in Marrakesh, Morocco in 2016, we will move ahead. Thank you.
That ends my presentation. So if you want to follow Climate Tracker, we have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course our website, climatetracker.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee, for your talk and for sharing your thoughts on how to engage youth in climate change. So now we're going to continue with the Q&A. If you want to join me here, we're going to sit here. We're going to take questions from the public and the audience here. We're also going to take questions from the internet. You can tweet. You can send your Facebook messages to #CCLS 2018. Yeah. And we will take them here and we'll forward them to Renee to answer and reflect upon. So we want to start here on the audience here in Cambridge. If anyone has any questions, we'll be happy to. Yeah.
Apart from Anna from Brazil, in general, what are the effects of journalism in the real life, like with policymakers, with states?
There are different effects of journalism. We can't just point that it's just the article that made the change. Of course, there are other things behind it. For example, there are already movements that help shape it. But journalism helps amplify the issue or helps put spotlight on the issue and helps pressure governments. So, for example, let's see, I know we have a tracker, for example, in, I forget which part of Africa, I'm sorry, but she wrote about drought in her community and that there is no access to water anymore. And after writing that article, her local government actually helped in creating a new well for the community. And so these are things that can happen because of writing an article. But an article isn't enough. It has to work with other things that are in society, as I said, like organizing communities or like already working with other actors. So it's not just, I don't think you can just point to like the article as the changing point, but it helps a lot in putting spotlight in the issue.
Yes, certainly the power structures are divided between many different powers. We have political powers, economic powers, growing financial powers, but we have to remember that one of the biggest driving forces of change in history in our societies is social power, how we manifest our demands, and that can also be driven through this media power. It's very important, and we're seeing it growing in power as well with the new technologies. If anyone has any more comments here in the audience in Cambridge. Otherwise, just remember everyone watching online that you can send your questions to hashtag CCLS 2018, either on Twitter or on Facebook.
You spoke about the Danish conference and the Paris conference. What are some of the actual policies that your organization would like to see promoted and would like to see sort of enacted following these conferences? What does a successful conference look like to you?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's different for different people, I guess, because Climate Tracker doesn't push a policy as an organization because we are journalists, we are writers. But, for example, we have in our team people who would push for human rights. Or we have in our team people who would push for gender or for loss and damage. So it really depends on the individual. As an organization, we don't do that. But as an individual journalist, it's really up to them. For example, personally, when I was a fellow in COP21, I did put the spotlight on why human rights and gender are important issues in the negotiations.
Yeah, we can take this one here, and then that one there as well.
I was just wondering, from a practical point of view, do you provide training, but do you also provide funding for people to give them the time to investigate and write and so on, and travel?
Yes, we do. We do give a certain amount of money for our journalists, so we call them our fellows. The fellows receive amount of money for a number of stories that they produce for us, and we fly them to the conferences as well.
There's a question over there as well, or we can take some online questions after that one. So we can take that question first, please. Thank you.
Yeah, that's kind of a little bit related to the previous question. So I think in today's world, like, a lot of articles are just available online for free, and like it's really hard to earn any money with journalism. So what do you think? Like, is this an issue for, young people maybe who work at Climate Tracker for a while and then want to, pursue journalism as a career, but maybe it's hard, or even getting harder and harder with the years?
Certainly. They actually say journalism is dead, but we don't want to believe that. Or maybe we are in denial, I don't know. But we do. But we help so when our journalists publish stories in different media in their countries, we help them push to get paid. we want journalists paid, we want writers paid, because that's the fair thing to do. We don't want free work for anyone, because it's still work. So we try to help them do that. We try to help them negotiate with their editors, like, okay, how many articles, how much do you pay for me to do this? So that's very important for us.
So we have a question an online question. It says, how has Climate Tracker worked or collaborated with businesses to help reduce their carbon footprint or achieve positive climate action in communities?
The short answer is we don't work with businesses. Because businesses, of course, have an, what do you call this? Their own agenda.
Yep.
And that's very dangerous if you're a journalist and you want to write, you don't want to have hidden agendas in your articles. That's not right. That's not ethical.
So we have another question here.
Hi. I broadly agree with what you said, that people don't really understand what the climate issues are. But I think the reason is the articles are so badly written. Please forgive me to saying that, because most of the articles I read, I think the people who write the articles, they have no idea whatsoever about the climate change. I'll give you an example. I think last year there was a big ice shelf carving in Antarctica. It was called Larsen B. So there were a lot of articles about how the single carving event would increase the sea level rise by so many millimeters, which is scientifically untrue. It's not going to change any sea level rise whatsoever. So my question is, how do you train the journalists who are going to write to actually read the papers and understand the scientific background of it? Because most of the papers, the articles I read, they're gross exaggerations and mostly are scientifically inaccurate. So what are you going to do about it? Because unless you write accurately, they don't have any credibility with the articles.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. And this is actually a very big problem, especially for big media. I mean, you see, for example, I don't know, who goes to the COPs like Reuters or maybe AFP, who just, write publications about general things and are not even accurate, even for policy. Like, they don't even know what's being talked about. For our workshops, we do invite experts in the field. For example, in our workshop in the Philippines, we invited a science communicator and a science journalist who's actually now studying at the MIT doing science journalism. And we understand that it's very, very important to get the science accurately. And this is also where scientists, I believe, should get out again of their bubble and communicate with the journalists. Because if you just give journalists these papers, do journalists actually have time when they have to produce, I don't know, in today's journalism, journalists actually have to produce a lot of things, not just articles, but they have to tweet, they have to do videos, they have to do lots of things. And if you give us a 500-page scientific paper, do you actually think that journalists will read it? Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. I mean, we try our best to read whatever it is that's there. But you can't expect us to understand everything. The IPCC report, for example, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, how thick is one report? I would only read the summary maybe per chapter, but do you expect me to read everything that's there? I don't think journalists would read that.
I think in climate change it's very important to get the science right, but we should put more focus in how we communicate other dimensions of climate change that are much more important. The social consequences, the political consequences. These have the power to go to the root of the problem, to changing the values, to changing our morals and how we build on our lives and how we make them more sustainable and respectful for other people. So I think it boils down more to going back to communicate right the social, the justice issues around climate change. while we're getting science right, but putting more the focus on these social, these personal stories, these impact stories, and connecting all these different dots. That makes people mobilize. That will make people active. So I wanted to ask you a question. I've been thinking about this for the last few weeks. It's about how do we get people mobilized, especially how do we get young people mobilized. And I've heard from you that you were talking about the people, that we need to put people in the core of climate change. And I have also seen Xiaozie from Nigeria wearing a T-shirt that was calling for climate justice, and you also mentioned it in your talk. So I've been reflecting on that, and I think that this message about climate justice, that we're fighting for an injustice, that has the potential to mobilize so much people. Like, it's in the nature of all of us to raise against inequality, to raise against injustice, to mobilize, to come together to fight a common problem that we have, that is injustice. In your experience, how much do you think this kind of message mobilizes people and activates people? Or is there any other message that can get to that point where we activate people?
There's actually, I attended a conference in Huelva in Spain last year, and there was a very, very good speaker, and I can't forget what she said. She said, don't ever use fear, because fear immobilizes people. So when we talk about climate change, it's true, sometimes it's exaggerated. Let's not exaggerate things. It's hopefully not the end of the world. But let's not use fear. I think mobilizing people involves hope. I think when we talk about stories of climate change, we need to ensure that people think that there is room for movement and improvement. And that will keep them going, because they will think, hey, I can actually do something. Because if you just tell people, the world is actually ending, then why would I act on something if it's not going to improve anyway?
Cool, thanks. So we also have another question here from our hashtag CCLS 2018. How many countries has Climate Tracker helped to spread awareness of climate change? In which type of media has proved to be most effective?
Right now we are in 150 countries. Which type of media depends on which country. Some countries, social media is very big, so digital media, publishing in online news, it's very big. For example, Pavlos, one of our trackers from Greece, published in a digital news site against Monsanto, which got shared over 200,000 times overnight, which is a big impact. But sometimes in other countries, it's still about newspapers and being in the front page. So it really depends on the media of the country. There's no one generic thing.
We can take that. Okay.
How do you think we should be helping communities tackle the issues that they're facing head on, as well as informing them of the issues they're facing?
I think, let me give you an example, a specific one. And forgive me, I will always talk about the Philippines because that's where I'm from. But when Typhoon Haiyan happened, there was one very small island that was hit by the typhoon where no one died. And everyone was shocked. Why is this community so good at being, resilient, of adapting to climate change? And what they do, they actually mobilize the community themselves. They involve the community to participate in planning how to adapt to climate change. They even turned the framework, the Sendai framework on disasters, into their local language. And it's painted on the wall of the local government office so everyone can read it. And these things, and the community decided, for example, that their market should be collapsible. So anytime there's a typhoon coming, they just fold down their market and then they hide in caves. They have lots of caves in this island. They know their designated cave, hide there for a few days, come out, rebuild their community. And that's very important. You have to involve the community. If it's just decision makers and policy makers telling you what to do, it's not going to be effective. They have to know that they have stake, that they can act on it themselves.
Cool. Can we get a mic here and another one there? And meanwhile, I'll read you another question that we have. Very interesting one. This: for young people, climate change is the issue of their generation. I guess for you and me, it's also the issue. Do you think older generations are ready to give up some of their power?
Wow. Difficult. It's the older generations that are actually the problem. I'm so sorry for the older generations. But it's difficult to change the system. Climate change is about changing the system. I don't know if you've all read Naomi Klein's book, This Changes Everything. Basically, in summary, she said the older generations are actually afraid to change anything because it means changing everything. Because, let's admit it, this all happened because of the Industrial Revolution, which started in here. And it's the capitalist system, basically, that we have to change.
So let's take his question, and we're going to take two questions together, and then go.
Hello. So I was wondering, is the purpose of your organization was to raise awareness in different countries, or do you help in any different local community projects?
We don't help in local community projects. We raise awareness, but mostly what we want to be or to do is actually to engage, not just raise awareness, but engage young people in communities to have a voice and to show that they also have power and that they can influence something in their community.
Yeah, thank you. When I look at your activities, it sounds like you're working in boundary between the activism and also journalism. So it's, in one hand, we can understand your work, your activities more like a very traditional, like classical NGO activities. But on the other hand, you're working on publishing many articles, so it's working as a journalist. And it sounds like, for me, it's like a typical case of the advocacy journalism for the climate change. And which somehow like reminds me the controversy around controversy around the Guardian's the campaign on keep it on the ground, and particularly the divestment argument. There are a lot of supports for the action by the Guardian, but at the same time, there is a question about what is the role of journalism. So I don't know. I think your activity is quite powerful and creating a lot of changes. But do you think those like mainstream media has to change to be somehow same as like advocacy journalism, or do you think what are you expecting to change the mainstream journalism? How should it change?
I understand what you mean. There is a very fine line between advocacy and journalism these days, right? And I've asked this a lot myself, and I had a very good conversation with a very good investigative journalist. And I asked her, is what we are doing wrong? Because we are pushing for something. Obviously, we are pushing for a better world, and it sounds like it's an advocacy. But then she tells me, yeah, but this is the reality we are facing. How is that an advocacy? It's what the public is facing. It's what everyone is facing. It's reality. It's not an opinion. This is my favorite thing. I watched a video, and it's not as if you're asking if climate change is real or not, because it's real. It's no longer an opinion. It's a fact. And journalism is about facts.
I also think there's no activism without journalism. There's a lot of media power that we can exert in governments from an activist point of view. So I agree with you, and I think it is completely right to take this approach, because it's apart from being a reality, it's also that we are almost responsible for this, and we have the responsibility to stand up and defend nature, defend ourselves So he's completely right to stand up as a journalist and call out all these aggressions on Mother Earth. We should definitely be doing that, in my view. So here we have another question, and this comes back to the issue we were discussing before about climate justice. And we have someone asking, what is our responsibility regarding climate change in the poor countries? And how is this responsibility distributed regarding age and wealth?
For me, that responsibility translates to climate finance. Because, developing countries, we don't have much resources, and we admit that. And we want, for every climate impact that we experience, and there is already a research that shows that extreme weather events are actually connected to climate change. It's also the poorest in our countries who experience it, and we just want that the rich countries who have done like the historical emissions to pay us for that damage. And unfortunately, there's always a question. The rich countries would always question, until when are we going to pay you? I don't know. There's no answer, I guess. There's no answer yet. But that's what we want. We want to be paid for the damages that, other people has done to us.
Yeah, that's the least the wealthy countries should do. The first thing is to stop causing climate change and mitigate as much as possible. And this is what many activists and many newsletters talk about, the climate debt, right? It's a very powerful concept, and I think it should be definitely applied to reach climate justice. The people responsible for climate change should pay for what they've done. The polluters should pay. Fossil fuel companies should pay for the disasters that they're exacerbating, especially in the vulnerable communities of the global south. Any more questions? Hugh has a question.
So you're a climate journalist based at the University of East Anglia, which is well known for its climate research. How good a job do you think they do at the University of East Anglia at communicating their research?
Very bad. The Tyndall Center for Climate Change Research is there. And I've had also some conversations with people who have worked with them, saying that somehow, because of course the Tyndall Center, for example, is made up of, a lot of scientists, probably older ones. And probably they are also a bit more resistant to new things, to trying new things, like social media, for example, reaching younger people through social media. But I think it's still the same, like in different research centers. I mean, I love UEA, but I think a lot has to be improved still in that part.
Cool. Another question there, and then we can send another mic to you.
Could you please elaborate on the way in which you encourage people in geographically isolated areas to engage with this, and then how you mentor and encourage them?
Yes. So we have mentorship programs. So when they join our programs and we see that they have potential, for example, we assign them a mentor. Either it's a Climate Tracker alumni from before who are from the same community or from the same country, or one of the staff. And we ensure, for example, that if you're from an Arab region, it's someone from an Arab country or someone nearer you who understands your context, who understands basically who you are as a person. That's very important for us. And that may be from the 2 months to maybe 6 months of mentorship, depending on the program. And from that mentorship, we've had a lot of feedback saying they've been published more in their communities or in their national newspapers, and that they are able to reach out to more editors as well. So that's kind of how we do it.
Climate trackers, they are really active at COPs, at the climate conference. Now we can read about it that several UN bodies, they want to strengthen their partnerships with civil society organizations. We can read about it in our Sustainable Development Goals, or for example, UNHCR has now in its New York declaration, it wants to strengthen its partnership with several stakeholders and especially with civil society organizations. So what kind of partnership would you like to have with UN bodies?
We actually have a partnership with the UNFCCC, the UNFCCC. Basically, our partnership involves translating the policies that are shaped in the UNFCCC into a more digestible, easy to read things. For example, when I showed you the loss and damage infographic, that was one of our products for them. So when or the Paris Agreement, for example, we did an infographic for the Paris Agreement for people who don't want to read the whole Paris Agreement. So we did like a summary of it. We do videos as well, so we interview people. For example, in the COP there is a Gender Day, and we do videos of women, for example, inside the conference and ask them why is it important for women to be actively participating inside these negotiations. So different things. Yeah.
Cool. I have a question now for you. So in your presentation, one of my favorite slides was the one that you were talking about building narratives and how much power the narrative has. What do you think is the paper of building narratives? What's the role of building narratives in actually achieving this systemic change that you were talking before? That we have to change the system, the capitalistic system.
I mean, of course, we have... Oh, I'm going to be very academic now.
Oh, you don't.
Because I'm doing this for my master's. We have current discourse, right? When discourse is how we talk about things naturally. So, for example, in climate change discourse in journalism, usually droughts, typhoons, climate change impacts, they are covered by media as one-time event, right? A typhoon comes, people die, journalists come over, we took photos, videos of like the disaster, and that ends there. The conversation ends there. And if we want to change that narrative, if we want people to understand more what is behind this, and if we want people to actually change the system, we have to change that narrative. You know, these are not just one-time events. These are caused by something more, and that is caused by something else. If we talk about extreme weather events as not just a one-time thing, but as something that is actually connected to the issue of climate justice and how that is connected to all these historical emissions and to the problem of the system as a whole, then we can change something. Then people will begin to understand, it's not just a typhoon. It's not just drought. It's something bigger. And the issue is something deeper. And that's what we need to do.
Thanks. Yep.
You mentioned a couple of times about how a lot of this is caused by the capitalist system. Could you expand on that, please?
Yes, of course. So if you look at the graph of when carbon emissions started becoming more and more, that started during the Industrial Revolution when we started using coal to power energy, and then we started using oil and natural gas to power everything, basically. And it's about, for example, these fossil fuel companies who are, of course, like very rich, and businesses who don't care about the environment. And that is the problem. And it's a problem of a system of consumerism, where we just keep on consuming and don't think about the consequences of that. And now we live in a world where it's no longer sustainable. how many planets do we need to sustain how we live? There is actually a quiz about that by WWF, and shockingly, I need 2 planets for myself on how I live today. And sadly, that's because it's how, we are now.
Yeah, I would really agree with that. I think it boils down to what do we consider success, or what does a capitalistic system consider an economic success? And if you look at it at an individual level, you consider success earning more money and therefore consuming more things, being able to buy more things. Being able to buy more things in a capitalistic system means being able to consume more things, and being able to consume more things intrinsically means spending more energy, spending more natural resources, drawing more natural resources from Mother Earth, and that intrinsically has all these ecological implications that we're seeing right now. That individual level, but that also applies to any other level, even to national level. What do we want? What's economic success for a capitalistic system? Increase your GDP, increase your exports, increase your production, increase your energy production. The energy dominance that we see in the US, that's a product of a capitalistic system as well. And that is what's driving US emissions up again. And that's what's been driving, that's the principal cause and the root of the US being the absolute winner in historical emissions, the absolute responsible for all this mess that we have had here. So it's about confronting profit against people, profit against the planet and nature that sustains all of us. I think here is the root of the problem, and here is also where the solution comes from. This is the idea where the solution of system change comes from, that we actually have to fight against a very pervasive system that has dominated the whole of our Western society. Luckily, it's not all the societies in the world. It's mostly these North developed countries' societies. We have to learn more about all the societies living in connection with nature, about how to live and how to value an economy that works both for the people but also for the planet. Yeah, I will not talk much more on that, but I think it's a very interesting topic and has to be raised. And talking about that and having these conversations, it helps so much in shaping the narratives as well, conversations and stories together. We can take maybe one last question, and we'll call it there. We have one question here from the audience online, and it comes back to science and communication. We have heard a lot about that. So this is, how should scientists best communicate with the public and journalists? And this is from an engineer called Helen Gillard.
Okay, that's interesting. I think scientists should just get out of their laboratories, really, and talk to us. I've never talked to a scientist. Mm-hmm. Have you talked to us?
Well, I'm a scientist.
You're a scientist. I've like, if they take time probably to get out of their laboratories and to just, I don't know, as easy as having coffee, explain to me like what's that, that new graph that you made. I mean, just have a conversation, a nice conversation. But yeah, I think that's effective.
Great.
So visit as a scientist, you know? You can go to visit as a scientist.
Yeah, of course. I hope they open their laboratories to us. I will go to Marcel.
I can show you tomorrow. Great. Thank you very much all for your contributions, your comments, your questions. Thank you also online for watching us and for sending your questions. And I hope everyone has had the chance to participate and make their statement. And thank you especially to Renee to come here and tell us everything you know about climate change. Thank you very much.